Security forces crack down on the protesters in Pearl Roundabout. But as neighbouring countries deploy the troops to Bahrain, are they containing instability or spreading it? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sami Zaidan. Well, Iran has called the deployment of Saudi and Emirati troops in Bahrain unacceptable, warning Riyadh and its ally Washington of dangerous consequences for intervening in the crisis. But the troops have been sent at a request from the Bahraini government, which condemned Iran's comments and withdrew its ambassador to Tehran. The troops have been dispatched as part of the Gulf Shield Forces, jointly formed by the GCC or the Gulf Cooperation Council. Well, the GCC includes a mutual defence agreement against possible internal and external subversion. Let's talk a little bit about the bloc. It was established in 1981, 2 years after the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979, by the 6 Arab Gulf states. Well, some saw this as an attempt to contain Tehran's regional influence. Both Saudi Arabia and Iran have a little bit of a history in rivalry, backing different sides in a number of confrontations like Iraq, Lebanon, and most recently in Yemen. That's when Saudi, of course, sent troops to fight the Shia Houthi rebels. Well, to discuss our topic further are our three guests here today. In Jeddah, Hussein Shabokhshi, he's a columnist with the Sharq al-Awsat newspaper. In Washington, D.C., Simon Henderson, the director of the Gulf and Energy Policy Program at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. And in Tehran, Mr Nanduri, journalist and political analyst. Let's welcome all of our guests to the show. If I could start with Hussein Shabokhshi, why do countries like Saudi Arabia and the Emirates feel obliged to intervene and act?
Well, they are basically exercising a very clear clause in the agreement that is stated between the GCC members nations, that in case of a national emergency determined by the country itself, these troops that belong to these countries can come in invited to take care of strategic locations and be under the guidance of that particular country to be in charge of a complete security plan. And that is exactly what's happening. They are protecting vital interests of that state and vital strategic locations.
But what's at stake here, sir, for Saudi Arabia?
As of vital
is there
interest.
a feeling in Saudi that an internal protest movement in Bahrain is a threat to Saudi or a threat to wider GCC security and stability?
I mean, dealing with this issue as a clear and only internal issue is truly misleading. Iran did not jump in ship and did not exercise its role vocally because it's an internal affair. It's very much a regional issue. Saudi Arabia does not dictate this policy. It is a GCC decision.
So hang on, are you saying that Iran is using the situation in Bahrain to spread its own influence and Saudi Arabia is simply responding to that sort of influence from Iran or intervention?
I'm not saying that. Everybody else has said it. The decision by the Bahraini government to withdraw its embassy is based on that. A lot of comments and even statements by analysts and government officials in the region from as far away as Morocco to Egypt to Lebanon have all been voicing concerns about the clear Iranian intervention in the affairs of Bahrain. Some of these interventions were subtle and some were very vulgarly blunt.
All right, let's take that view to Tehran now. And Mr Nanduri, your response to that. Mr Shabokhshi says, I'm not saying it, but many in the region are. Iran has been interfering in the situation in Bahrain, which is what's brought this whole situation to a head.
Well, that's a good argument because this kind of tricks worked in the past, but they are not going to work anymore because people have awakened. This is Islamic awakening. It has nothing to do with Iran or Saudi Arabia or any other country. This has to do with the legitimate demands of the general public. The general public wants an end to dictatorships and tyrant regimes.
But Iran does have a good relationship with some of the opposition parties in Bahrain, doesn't it?
Well, but Iran does not interfere in the internal affairs of Bahrain. Iran is simply saying that you have to allow people speak out their demands, and you should let them take to the streets and ask for reforms. If you cannot make those reforms, you should simply just step aside and allow someone else that is competent enough to step in and take the lead. But unfortunately, some of the regional states, such as Bahrain, are not listening to the realities on the ground. They think that, just like the past, they can use guns and force to settle their differences with the general public. But this is not going to work this time around.
All right, let's take the view from Washington now. And Mr Henderson, I think, however you look at it, there's little doubt that this has become something of a regional struggle, isn't there?
Yes, I must also point out it's delightfully ironic that Iranian leaders are saying that protests should be allowed and peaceful demonstrations should be allowed when, in my mind and the memory of many people, is the video of the vicious suppression of peaceful demonstrations in Tehran following the elections there a couple of years back. But Washington sees this crisis in Bahrain probably in different terms. I think many people here can recognize that there's a rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and they can also see that Bahrain is sort of caught in the middle. It's a majority Shiite population ruled by a Sunni ruling family. But this also comes, at least in the perceptions of the White House, in terms of the winds of change which are sweeping through the Middle East at the moment.
Right, you hinted at a little bit of perhaps, if I could call it, an official Iranian hypocrisy in how they've dealt with protests in their country. Is there a little bit of hypocrisy from the White House too, or from Washington too, in how it's dealing with this situation that's going on in Bahrain, being torn between, on the one hand, supporting democracy, and on the other hand, the other goal of containing Iran?
Well, I don't think they necessarily have to be either ors, and frankly, the mood in Washington amongst the general public and those who are trying to make sense of the situation is that if only there was a clearer policy emanating from the White House, then we would be able to tell whether it's sensible, hypocritical, give it whatever label you would like.
But Defense Secretary, if I could quote to you here what Defense Secretary Robert Gates, he's been urging the United States ally Bahrain to take what he's calling far-reaching steps towards reform, calling for or expressing the fears about Iranian influence. And this is what he's been saying. He's saying there is clear, particular evidence that as the process is protracted, particularly in Bahrain, the Iranians are looking for ways to exploit it and create problems. Now, when you listen to that, don't you get the idea, Mr. Henderson, that Washington is saying priority is keeping Iran out? We'll worry about democracy later. Yes,
but he was also saying to the Bahraini government in remarks, I think, on Saturday, that Bahrain should be taking more than baby steps towards democracy, which the sense here was that he was therefore encouraging the democracy aspect of the policy rather than the contain Iran aspect.
All right, let's go back to Hussein Shabukhshi. In a sense, do you take on board any of the points which are being made by our guests from Iran, by the statements that we have from Iranian officials who are saying that you're basically intervening against the will of the people? Is Saudi Arabia comfortable being seen the line to which they intervene to put down a public protest?
I am astounded by the comments from your guest in Tehran, because for a second I thought he was talking from Paris or Geneva or Sweden. Then I remind myself it's in Tehran. There have been crushing movements much lesser than the ones in Bahrain for the longest time. And the gentleman in Washington, D.C. belongs to a think tank that has been trying to market to us that Israel is the only democracy model in the Middle East. It's a caste system. It's a vulgar caste system. I don't want either model, not the Iranian, not the Israeli. We want something in the Middle East, from the Middle East, by the Middle East.
But isn't that what we're seeing, sir, on the streets of Bahrain? People are protesting for a different system of life.
We're seeing a protest. I'm gonna get to that. We are seeing protests in Bahrain, but there is no legitimate way to try to convince the Bahrainis themselves, Shias or Sunnis, that these people on the street speak for the complete opposition of Bahrain. There are demands issued by these people that do not adhere to the rest of the demands by the rest of the oppositions in Bahrain itself, be it Shia or Sunni. There is something fishy about that. When you tell me this is a peaceful movement and they block the main artery of Bahrain, King Faisal Road, and when they attack universities and hospitals and occupy them, that is not a way of expressing peaceful opposition.
But how do you
I'm
get
sorry,
to that
this
conclusion?
paralyzes a state.
So how do you get to that conclusion? And how do you make the situation clear about who speaks for the majority by sending in troops and tanks to suppress a protest?
Again, the sending in the troops is an issue that the government of Bahrain, it is still a legitimate regime, mind you, they speak for their people and they can determine what is dangerous, what is a security threat, and therefore take a proper act and decision. However, the opposition in Bahrain is fragmented. There are different voices, different demands, and different scales of demands. I cannot allow a certain group to hijack the opposition and speak on its behalf. This is a bit of a simplistic approach to a very serious problem.
All right, let's go over to Iran and get the perspective from Mr Nanduri once again. Will Iran feel now inclined to intervene in a more direct way than we've seen perhaps in the past because of this?
Well, with all due respect to your distinguished guests, I think it's an insult. What the arguments that they have made so far is an insult to the intelligence of the Bahraini people. We are talking about intelligent people, doctors, nurses, teachers, and these people are greater than Iran and any other country in the Middle East. These people are speaking for themselves. They are representing their own demands than their own society, and it doesn't matter if they are Sunni or Shia. They are, first of all, Bahrainis. And I think we should stop using Iran as a scapegoat to blame that this is Iran that is trying to influence the Bahrainis. No, Iran is not going to do that, because Iran is far, far, far less influential than even that small kid on the streets of Bahrain that is asking for freedom and reform. This is the feeling here. Iranians are simply asking to allow these people to speak out for themselves. I mean, by sending troops, yes, Saudi Arabia has the guns and ships and the tanks. They can stop the popular uprising for a couple of weeks, days, months, probably years. Yes, they can do that. They can also kill so many people. They can also do that. But I'm telling you, you cannot kill to govern
Mr.
a country. You need to govern the hearts and minds of the people.
Doesn't he have a point when he says that at the end of the day, Iranian leaders are at least perceived to have suppressed protests in their own country? The motive for Iran to speak out on Bahrain cannot be simply to support protesters and democracy.
Well, there have been some mistakes in Iran. I have told you in your previous program so many times that I have blamed the Interior Ministry in Iran for failing to provide security for the demonstrators. They have the responsibility to provide police and security forces. They have to specify a specific route, and they should also ensure the safety of the health and safety of the people who take to the streets. And at the same time, they should the opposition groups should have some kind of communication channel. They have to build that kind of communication channel with the Interior Ministry, and they should get the permission to do so. Then they can take to the streets. Unfortunately, both sides have made mistakes, and I am very sorry. I am very unhappy to see that some innocent lives have been killed in between. But I'm telling you, this has to do with the Interior Ministry and the opposition group. It has nothing to do with the system.
Since we're talking about Iran, let's look at what Iran's foreign minister had to say about the attempt to quell those protests. He says the presence of foreign troops in Bahrain is unacceptable. It is expected from the Bahraini government to deal with the demands of the people with insight and to respect the rights of people who are following up on their demands through peaceful means. We go back to Washington now. When we see statements coming out of Tehran going in one direction and we see, could say, forces coming out of Riyadh in another direction, is that going to increase, do you think, the Sunni-Shia tensions right across the region, not only in Bahrain?
Well, it certainly has the potential for doing that, but I think for the moment we sort of have to wait and see, and the situation in Bahrain is worrying enough.
So you don't expect that we're going to see some of this play out in Yemen, in Iraq, in Lebanon, if things get out of control in Bahrain?
Well, I think things are fairly out of control in Bahrain anyway. I think there's, the events of this week has merely put the lid back on the saucepan. It hasn't stopped the contents of the saucepan bubbling. I would hesitate to be too sweeping in saying this is going to lead to other things in Iraq or Lebanon or Yemen. It could. It may not. One of the interesting things about these changes and tensions which are happening in the Arab world now are that each one of them is actually rather different from the next. But you've mentioned or you've raised the possibility of an important ingredient, and that is the extent to which other people try to interfere in whatever may be going on in one country or another. And for better or worse, Iran has a reputation for interference across the Middle East. As frankly, the example of this ship being seized in the Mediterranean yesterday, which appears to be carrying Iranian arms for people in Gaza. And so the accent or the focus at the moment should be on this potential for Iranian troublemaking and measures to limit the effectiveness of this and constrain Tehran.
All right, let's go to Hussein Shabokhshi once again. Does the deployment of forces, in a sense, perhaps change the GCC? Because we're now seeing GCC forces being deployed not to protect a country from another foreign country's aggression, but to deal with internal domestic problems. That's a bit of a shall we say, at least a development on those GCC agreements, isn't it?
I can't help but comment on what your guest in Washington said about objecting to arms from Iran to Gaza people, and not mentioning that the Gaza people are being massacred every day by Israeli planes, making what's happening in Libya look like a picnic compared to what Israel has been doing to the Palestinians. But that's another show by itself. The local issues in the GCC countries are challenging, no doubt. And we have seen just the tip of the iceberg, but definitely they should be handled by the GCC, by voicing the concerns by GCC members without any interference, without any lecturing or setting standards that are not necessarily belonging to these countries. There are a lot of challenges and
my question,
issues.
does this set a precedent now? Is the GCC forces going to become some kind of internal security operation that can be deployed anywhere where there's a protest?
This precedent you're talking about has existed in many, be it in the Arab world. We've seen the Arab forces go into Lebanon during its civil war. We've seen the Europeans do that in Bosnia. We've seen it.
But this wasn't a civil war, sir, was it? I mean, what is the mandate?
But the charter, it's according to the charter.
You don't see NATO deploying forces to deal with protests in Greece, do we?
No, we don't. But that's an option that they could exercise, my friend. And that's what I'm saying. The charter of the GCC allows that if it's a threat. A threat is defined by the government itself. This is the window of opportunity that Bahrain exercised. It doesn't say, the charter does not say it cannot bring in troops if it's a local threat. It doesn't say that. So in this case, they are not defying any law. They are interpreting an already existing charter.
Well, do you think it's the right use, the right mandate here for GCC countries and GCC forces?
It is not my opinion. What I saw that the Bahrainis...
Well, I would like your opinion, so you're on the show.
I'm telling you my opinion. I'm telling you my opinion, but it's not going to matter because what I saw during the entry of these troops in Bahrain, there was a divided opinion. Some Bahrainis were welcoming them and decided this might be an opportunity to breathe a sigh of relief and regain some normalcy in the country that have been lost for the last month. Some others viewed it as a threat. Some saw it as an invasion. Some saw it as a massacre. Obviously, there was a lot of exaggeration and probably some yellow journalism involved for political arguments or for political leverage. What I would like to see here is a dialogue to be opened between the opposing forces to the government in Bahrain and the Bahraini government. There are serious issues raised by the opposition that needs to be addressed, very important issues that need to be addressed. But however, the opposition needs to understand that unless it can make a solid argument, it cannot address issues that not the entire population of Bahrain agrees to.
All right, let's go to Mr Nanduri once again. Do you think what's going on is a threat to the sort of unwritten agreement, I guess you could say, that's held between Saudi Arabia and Iran for a number of years now to keep a lid on tensions? Is this a game changer?
Well, it's a good question. What we are seeing now is nervous Saudi officials who have sent troops to Bahrain to ensure that the tsunami of popular uprising does not reach the Saudi shores. That's exactly why they are there. They are not there to care and support and back and secure the safety of the Bahraini government or the people. They are there they are there for themselves. They want to make sure that the revolution does not reach the capital Riyadh, and that creates a lot of concern for Iran, because Saudi Arabia is trying to give the impression that it has the upper hand and it has the ability, the capacity and the means to control security in the whole region. But it is also sending wrong signals at the same time. It is showing itself as an oppressive regime that does not want to listen to the legitimate demands of the people. And on the other hand, it also demonstrates the fact that it is an interfering force and regime in another country that is a sovereign nation and knows what they want and knows what it wants and knows
so
what
my question was more about
be.
How might Iran seek to respond now? Might it seek to use any influence it has with the Bahraini opposition to come to some sort of agreement or to escalate?
Interesting. Iran believes in the might of the people. Iran knows that. Iran had that experience in the past 32 years ago. And we have seen so far that only people have succeeded, not the regime, not the oppressive dictators or the tyrants. So we have every faith in this world that sooner or later the people of Bahrain and even the people of Saudi Arabia, Yemen will succeed in toppling the dictatorship regimes, and they will be able to install a legitimate and elected government.
All right, Mr Henderson, I think we've just got maybe a couple of minutes left at this point, but I wanted to ask you about something which actually Mr Nanduri touched upon there. Is a message being sent by the GCC deployment not only about Shia-Sunni relations or tensions, but a message sent to the wider GCC population that dissent and organised dissent and protest movement by anyone will not be tolerated?
I fear that is the message being sent, and it's a consequence, as far as I can make out, of GCC disappointment, principally Saudi disappointment, in the stance taken by the Obama administration here in the United States, at particularly the events in Egypt, which led to the overthrow or the departure from office of President Mubarak. And the Saudis were concerned that somebody who was an ally of the United States was let go so quickly, and have drawn the conclusion, or appear to have drawn the at least tentative conclusion, that this questions the degree of US support for their own countries and the governments thereof. And I think this is the big open question, how the United States recovers that trust, which I think is an important element of trust, not only for US policy in the Middle East, but for stability in the Middle East.
That is a big question indeed. Thanks to all our guests for helping us to try and answer. It's been a great show. I got different opinions there, from Jeddah to Tehran to Washington. Let's thank our guests, Hussein Shabukhshi, Simon Henderson and Mr Nanduri. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Feel free to email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. For now, it's goodbye.